Right. And there's been a question for a lot of Bible lovers as well, who may have had conditions that they identify as being treatable in some ways by cannabis. Right. So let me make it's really a simple thing, but it's complicated. So there is a plant. It's a plant called the cannabis plant. All right. Now, if you break down the cannabis plant into the chemicals that make it up, there are over 100. A lot of them are in the category of what are called cannabinoids. There are cannabinoid receptors in the brain. So it's not unusual that some of these cannabinoids would interact with the brain and cause some kinds of interactions. The substance is one substance. It's called delta-9 trans-tetrahydrocannabinol, which is a psychedelic drug. It is indistinguishable from LSD or mescaline or psilocybin. If you adjust for dosage, it's the same thing. It is stronger than mescaline by weight. It is much weaker than LSD, which is very, very powerful. One glass would dose 100,000 people of pure LSD. Now, you've seen the same phenomenon now with fentanyl, which is an opioid, synthetic opioid that's very, very dangerous because it's very, very powerful and it's very, very teeny in terms of how much it takes to have an effect. So with LSD, we're dealing with micrograms, which is 1/1,000,000th of a gram. All right? So THC is a pure psychedelic. In various strains of cannabis, there are more or less of THC. In the old days, us old pot smokers, we were smoking cannabis varieties that had relatively little THC. And unless you were a heavy smoker, you weren't immediately dysfunctional. Another interesting aspect of THC. Now, Baba knew all of this before any of us knew it. Any of the scientists knew it. THC is attracted to and is absorbed by fat cells in the body. That means it's stored in the body. That means you can build up the amount of THC in the body even if you smoke moderately, if that's how you take it. So THC, as a Baba lover, you're safe to think of THC in the same way you think about LSD or mescaline or any of the psychedelics. And it's well known, under high doses of THC, you'll have LSD-like experiences. And remember the psychedelics, remember the old principle, it depends on the set and the setting. I'll give you an example. Marijuana is considered to not provoke violence, right? Like amphetamines might. And that is generally true because of the expectation in the set of people who smoke pot or take it. It's usually in a more relaxed orientation. But if you got somebody who's in a violent gang and they're stoned, that amps up the violence. The psychedelics amp up what's in the mind. The vibrational characteristics attract astral entities. Now, unfortunately, we cannot tell the legislators about astral entities. Anyway, bad news all around. Bob was very clear about that. Okay. Now, there are other cannabinoids in the cannabis plant that do not have mind-altering effect. In fact, most of them do not. The most popular one is cannabidinol, which is known as CBD, which is what should be talked about when we're talking about medical marijuana. It's the only one of the cannabinoids that has begun to be researched that may have some benefit for medical conditions. And to make it clear, Mayor Obama was extremely clear that any of these drugs could have medical uses. He was specific enough to say LSD, for example, could be used for chronic alcoholism. And I'll tell you why, but that's a whole other story. Also, it has come up from Bible lovers, we're very worried about taking psychiatric drugs. I think that's a terrible thing. Well, Baba basically said that any of these things that had medical uses under proper supervision could be used beneficially. Obviously could be abused also. So when we're talking about psychiatric drugs, which a huge amount of the population is on anyway, we're talking about, when properly used, it's restoring certain neurochemical imbalances. Now there may be better ways to do that than drugs, but for many people it can be very helpful. Not that they can't be abused. Baba understood the process of addiction and chemical dependency very well, and even used the term addicts in some of his orientation. He talked about alcohol in a couple of ways. One, moderate amount, especially if you're thinking about God, not so bad. A non-moderate amount, not good, and a moderate amount in negative psychological states, not good. And remember, Baba's not being moral about this, he's not being judgmental, he's just telling you where it's at. Back to marijuana. So, unfortunately, none of the policymakers, the laws, have been able yet to, they don't know the research and they can't distinguish between the different components, so that the ability of people to buy, if you will, marijuana, particularly that has been bred to have a higher THC content, it's very troubling, and the side effects are probably worse than the benefit. In terms of CBD, and again, there isn't anything you can take that doesn't have some side effect, and the research is still out on it, but it probably is going to be beneficial for certain conditions. And Baba lovers shouldn't worry about that, although they're free to worry about the legal issues. The feds are fighting the states, and it's difficult to find out the pure sources. A lot of physicians have set up shops to make money out of dispensing medical marijuana. You walk in and say, I have a pain in the back. Oh, good. Well, here's a prescription. It's being misused. So that's the deal. Real easy. THC, psychedelic, very, very serious consequences possible. Build up in the system, attracts entities, and has demonstrable effects, as we oldsters know. I mean, there's a thing called the amotivational syndrome. You know that. Oh, just sit around, man, and it's cool. So there are behavioral side effects. So a lot of brain side effects. Somebody who ingests THC has a 5 times higher risk of going into schizophrenia, for example. In terms of brain development for kids, it really screws up ordinary developmental processes. So even the proponents of legalized marijuana really don't want kids to have it. They're being sincere because they know. There's also the issue of driving under the influence. And that's been tricky because since marijuana stays in the system, if you get tested for it driving, even if you took it last week, you might come up positive. The other problem is that if you're around anybody who's smoking dope, you can absorb it and can fail a drug test. The problem of legalization now, you're going to see most of the recreational marijuana is moving towards edibles. Brownies, cookies, candy bars, etc. Because the smoke itself, people know the smoke is not going to be good for you. Vaping, there's a development of really high concentrated THC in, well, hashish used to have a higher concentration. Now they have stuff called wax and shatter, which is a very, very high concentration of THC and is used kind of like LSD. So this is a real problem, particularly with young children who are grabbing their parents' brownies from the refrigerator and showing up in emergency rooms. So it's still a big issue. The results back from Colorado are showing a lot more emergency visits. There is a tendency, and Baba pointed out, of all drugs to escalate. All of these non-medical use drugs affect the neurochemistry of pleasure and pain that get you high. You develop a tolerance for them, so that you're always needing more in order to get the same effect. That's how a heroin addict gets addicted, and it can happen very quickly. You never get the original high, and the person who's dependent is simply trying to get back to average. They're not trying to get high anymore, because the withdrawal symptoms are very great. So it turns out that THC can be, it's not classically addictive, but it's certainly very habit-forming. And your body does make a tolerance, and it takes about 3 months to clear out the system. So one of the tests is when I talk to people, I say, well, are you getting dependent on marijuana? What are you talking about? Guy, I was on a radio show. Guy calls up, it is outrageous that you say that you can become dependent on marijuana. I have smoked every day for the last 9 years, and I have no addiction. Wonderful. So I say, all right, well, see if you can stop for 3 weeks. If you cannot stop for 3 weeks, you're dependent. And they all say, well, of course I could stop for 3 weeks. But they don't. And then the next thing is to stop for 3 months. Anyway, so it's a definite issue. And then there's the connection between marijuana and opioids and prescription drugs. And again, though, the proponents of recreational marijuana will tell you there's not a causal connection between smoking dope and becoming an opioid addict. The fact is that every one of these drugs, and Mayor Baba nailed it will always is eventually unsatisfactory. Never gets the job done. And you can always ask a doper on anything, how's it working for you now? Not great. And Baba pointed out in the last film he did, the major film that Louis von Gastrin did in 1968, the ultimate criticism, he nailed it, of any of these drugs. They, no matter how much you love them, they do not last. All right? And even if you talk to the most proponent, committed drug user, they understand that. You get high, it don't last. I remember Dick Alpert once took a bunch of LSD and tried to stay up as long as he could and see how long he could stay high. 3 days was it. And he both developed a tolerance and fell asleep. So, Baba was really a remarkable pharmaceutical scientist in the early 60s, when very little was known about this. So I think it's important for Baba lovers not to get confused about this controversy, and that it would be almost universally a mistake to use ordinary marijuana for medical purposes. Now, there are even a few legitimate medical uses for pharmaceutical grade THC. They're not usual ones, but they are specific, and there are drugs called Nabitol, etc., Marinol that have a synthetic formulation of THC that it sometimes is very rarely used. So, and as we saw, people are starting to use psilocybin for grief reactions, for alcoholism, and all of these were legitimate uses in terms of what Mayor Bob was talking about. Now, Mayor Bob not assumed, but of course wanted your medical supervisors to be competent and not, just in it for the money. So it's not a blanket thing just because somebody prescribes you something, or especially any of these drugs. Does that mean it's legitimate? It's not really under medical supervision if a person doesn't know what they're doing. Okay. Anyway, so Colorado is beginning to have second thoughts. The cartels are buying into the marijuana retail operations, which we could have predicted. So it's going to be a problem. Now, right now, the opioid crisis is a deeper problem in terms of life-threatening. And from Mayor Bob's point of view, well, you move on, you're dead, you move on. At least you're not wrecking your system anymore. So that, it's not a clear trade-off of people who don't get killed by the drug, but are really damaging their subtle bodies for maybe several lifetimes. Anyway, he was very sensitive about that. So it's interesting. It's a little controversy in the Baba world, and but once you know the science, it's easy to make a judgment on any of these issues. So, yes, you would. People ask me, well, what do I think about legalization? Bad idea. What do I think about decriminalization? Not such a bad idea. Let me explain the difference. Because the argument for legalization came about not because this was a particularly great drug, but because the consequence of people getting arrested and their lives being ruined for felonies was very compelling, considering the alternatives. So decriminalization says we're not going to make it a criminal offense, but we can make it a civil offense. Now there's a big advantage to that. And you give the example of alcohol. It's very difficult to help people who are chemically dependent on alcohol, on adults, because you don't have any leverage on them until they get in trouble. And it's very difficult to get dependent people to go into treatment. Very difficult. With civil reach, which you would have, for example, for minors' use of alcohol, you have the ability to compel referral. It's like if you get busted for drunk driving, you usually have to go to a class. At least you go to a class on drunk driving. And maybe if the judge is hip, and now there's a lot of DUI courts that specialize in this, they would refer you to counseling. Okay? So legalization kills the mechanism for referral. Now imagine what has to be done if you're totally addicted and dependent, say on THC, even if you leave your job, and even if you're really dysfunctional, unless you bother somebody or break a law, nobody can force you to get help. That is a big disadvantage of legalization. Now, in terms of alcohol, there's so much cultural history and experience with it that even your average family knows the word intervention, etc. And like LA had 2 Baba groups that were all AA groups, for example. So we have cultural experience. With these new drugs, we don't have that experience. And problems of issue with dosage, etc. So that seems a rational thing to do. I think Portugal has tried it with reasonable success. And that goes also for the use of heroin or cocaine or the misuse of prescription drugs or the sale of them. All of them, it's the intervention that's critical. If you can get to people early on, educate them about what's going on, and warn them, or it's not so much warn them, make them conscious that when they start feeling certain effects, they know they're in trouble. And I used to have more success when I talked to teenagers who were doing drugs than the ones who weren't, because I could say, well, let's see, you having trouble remembering phone numbers? I could begin to lay out some of the symptoms, the behavioral symptoms. Once, and again, it's tricky, education tricky. I gave a lecture to high school on drugs and marijuana, and I get a call from the principal a couple of weeks later. He says, marijuana use has gone down 40% since your lecture. I said, that's impossible. I mean, I know that's impossible. You just tell me, you may have been somewhat. He said, no, it's true. I said, could you go back to the students and find out why? And I found out the reason. They thought I had said that marijuana causes zits. So part of the, and this is a sidebar, but part of the secret of getting to people is you want to hit them in terms of where their value system is, that things are important to them. We got an ad for alcohol abuse banned in California because in the ad it was the scene was an attractive young woman and man, and then young adults, possibly teenagers, and they're drinking beer, and the guy says something like, well, shall we have another one? And she kind of looks sexy and says, oh, no, because of what's coming after. And we pilot tested it, and the thought that drinking too much hurt sexual performance was very effective. It was so effective, the alcohol industry went to the legislature, had them confiscate the video and burn it. And under the grounds that it was too objection. But anyway. So, but that's a side thing. Some years ago, I learned from local families that heroin was selling at, you call it Atlantic Beach or whatever.
Yeah.
That's where the dopers are, right?
Briar Cliff. Seriously,
On the other edge of Briar. Well, the real dealers. The heroin was going for $5, and prescription, like oxycodone, was going for something like $60 or $80. And so drug substitution happens a lot too. The old-time drug addicts who recover think that the new generation is very promiscuous in their use of drugs. They'll take anything. Now, we were loyal to our screwing around. So, anyway, that's a scene, and teenagers are very good at disguising their use, and very, very good. And I've had several Baba parents who have had real difficulties, and several who have actually had children die of overdoses, and some who are in treatment. So it's something to be alert about. We're still kind of working on it. But I wanted to clear up the THC and the cannabis and the marijuana issue.
Allan, are you involved with Narcotics Anonymous?
Am I involved with Narcotics Anonymous? No, but of course, I certainly know about them, and they are more comfortable for some of the drug addicts than AA, for example, who a lot of the classic like white suburban alcoholics, these guys who have been a little bit on the street, don't feel comfortable with them. So Narcotics Anonymous, which has the same basic principles, is more comfortable for the group that went through other kinds of addiction.
So where's the hip media and information that gets to the younger adults and the teens?
There isn't any.
There isn't any. How
I
can that
shouldn't say
come
there isn't
about?
any. Here's the problem. The schools don't want to admit there's any problem. Not in my school, not in Myrtle Beach High. There have been some school districts, I don't know. Now you have some experts here. John runs the thing in Conway.
John Copper.
Yeah. Some school districts in the U.S. have alternative schools that are specific to kids who've been using drugs and are recovering. That's very rare. So the school boards and the principals don't want to do a lot of drug and alcohol education because it suggests that their kids are using. They also don't want them to get caught because most of the schools, if they lose a kid, they lose state funding. You'll get a kick out of this, kind of. About 10 years ago, people got very, very hot on drug testing for schools. And in fact, one plot was to hook into the sewer lines that connected to the school bathroom as a measure of substance abuse in the school. That was a really good outcome measure. That didn't go too far. And drug testing, in fact, was federally mandatory for a while for certain schools to get funds for drug education. Now that broke down because if the kids tested positive for drugs, the schools didn't know what to do with them. Very, very few adolescent programs around. Very few. I mean, there are few enough adolescent mental health programs around. Adolescent drug programs around is even more difficult. So they're very hesitant to invest in that. They're not funded for it. There's a lot of pressure on the schools towards reading, writing, math, test performance, you know. I mean, many of you are involved in education. That's that difficulty. Then you've got the federal or state governments are not putting a lot of money into educational public service announcements. The ones that they do don't pay for their time, and they tend to be out like at 3 in the morning. And they tend to be done by adults who really don't understand kids. And a lot of you remember the old one where this is your brain on drugs, which was Friday. And it never occurred to them that kids would say, hey, that's really cool.
Well, we'll say in this area, as a teacher, I'm substituting, I'm technically retired. A lot of kids do have mental health counselors in the school, and they have to go through the psychiatrist.
Really?
And then so many of them wind up on medications.
That's right.
And I see what happens then. Okay.
That's right. If you weren't taking, you went to psychiatrists, it's a tough profession because they don't really do much psychotherapy anymore. They just dispense meds. And that's what they're under pressure to do. That's what they're paid to do. And it obeys the standards of practice. And particularly if there are not enough counselors around to work with kids, which there never not, that's a problem. So the PSA advertising isn't very good. Then the reporting in the newspapers is all written for, it's not written for kids. And it's written in lay language for parents, and they can't go into these kinds of details. You read an article about medical marijuana, they don't parse it at all. And the angles are very different. So the sources of good information, particularly for young people, are very, very restricted. And this particular administration, although you might, in the best of all thoughts, might consider it anti-drug, still is unwilling to budget funds for education or prevention programs. And we know that those can be effective. It's difficult to prove that prevention is effective because you're preventing something that doesn't happen. It's like a vaccine. It's very, very difficult to prove a vaccine works unless you have 10 or 20,000 people that you study. Anyway, there are now some really good websites that keep up on these issues. There's one called Families in Action, which is quite good. There's another one, I forget, it's kind of like Parents Opposed to Pot, or Pot, or something like that. But there's beginning to be community groups and online groups that are kind of taking some of the more relevant research and highlighting the need for education. We're just looking at we're now evaluating a 5th grade program on alcohol in the brain to actually get the kids to know about brain function and neuroscience and how alcohol, particularly in the developing brain, interacts with the system, and it looks like it's going to be effective. I mean, on the short term for 5th graders, but it's amazing. They're very interested in this stuff. It's amazing how sophisticated, like 5th and 6th graders are now. They're not like we were. They are not like we were. Man, they are 5 years ahead of we were. And they're, that's the other thing that happens. The schools say, we don't want to talk about it too early, because then they'll get interested in it. So let's wait until high school, right, when they're already stoned out of their minds. Right? So that's kind of what's happening. Hey,
Well,
Allan.
now, maybe you've already said this, but can you give me a kernel of, my concern is that there is a lack of good service available.
Yes.
So, what is coming online that's good for prevention or treatment?
Oh boy, that's such a big question. That's a whole journal worth of stuff.
Is it, well,
But I
from your
can-
viewpoint, because you can really see a lot, do you see that it's improving?
I see that there's good work being done that's going to be very helpful. Whether or not it can be implemented is the issue. Okay, our school is going to make room for even a 10-hour course in drug and alcohol education, which they often resist. But that's what it's down to. That's about the limit that schools are accepting, about 10 or 11 hours.
Okay, and if you're working on your program for drug and alcohol, are you interfacing at all with other programs for values clarification or non-bullying or other kinds of growth, socialization?
What is getting to be hot is more of the positive development model, where wellness, where prevention is seen as a more holistic kind of orientation. So it's some of these programs, for example, is one called Too Good for Drugs, and it's married with a very program very close to it called Too Good for Violence. So when it's done well, I mean, you have exactly the right instinct. that there should be holistic, positive educational input about behavioral health in general. And yes, there's been some good testing about good both curricula. What has been very helpful is the necessity of community service for kids. The whole notion of alternatives to drugs. The fact that if kids really get involved in something interesting to them, they're much less likely to abuse. And that's because if you're doing something seriously, like doing piano, for example, you can't be too stoned.
I was just telling someone I can't have one drink or I can't
That's
control
right.
my fingers,
Well,
so.
and that's what got Pete Townsend interested. I mean, there was for a while the notion that you could perform music better if you were stoned. And certainly it was a perception that you could listen better if you were stoned. Both turned out to be untrue. And so Pete was very, very active. He understood that. He saw the only reason the Who kind of lasted is because they got off of drugs. And it was very clear to him that although the perception of creativity might be higher when you're stoned, the execution of it is not. And I remember myself, 2 years, I was in Boston, and every year the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra would visit Boston. I really liked them. And I remember one year I went and we drove there with friends, and I said, who's got the pot? And nobody had any. I remember myself saying, oh, geez, I wanted to really listen to the music. Now, a year later, this is after I had gotten involved with Baba, we were driving to the concert. Somebody passed around the joint and said, no, I want to hear the music. And both were sincere beliefs. I mean, I wasn't being a goody-goody in the second hand. That's part of the difficulty with the subtlety of the psychedelic addiction is that it sets up a perception that's not true. At least most of the hardcore addicts are clear that their body needs it. There's not a pretense anymore about having brilliant creative thoughts. No, I'm just trying not to get sick. But there is an emergence, yes, there's being decent research done. There's been there's been some grants to communities for coalitional work where the schools and law enforcement and community mental health organizations work together to do public education. But it's tricky. Parents don't like to get involved in this kind of stuff. It's controversial. The kids can out-argue you usually, and they can hide it. They can hide it, and they can make you feel guilty as hell if you go through their stuff looking for dope.
Allan, what you were saying before was, what I heard is a small cases where THC-based marijuana might be beneficial in small cases. What about the non-THC, if they've...
The CBD.
The CBD.
Yes.
What areas are those helpful, and as Baba lovers, is that okay?
Well, let's see.
What about
what
cancer
he just said.
patients? It's supposed to help with, nausea and,
The-
all
The,
that kind
let's see, the work that's probably the most interesting so far has been the work with children with seizures. And that seems to be helpful for them.
For the CBD? Is
Yeah,
that what
for
you're on?
CBD.
Okay.
I mean,
Some, few.
enough to get
A reduction.
people for parents to get exceptions from states in which they could not ordinarily possess it. And, there are anecdotal reports of other possibilities, some pain reduction possibilities. And again, it's all very experimental. And that has been one of the problems of the hardcore anti-drug policies, where researchers can't get a hold of it in order to test it. In a Schedule I drug, it's very difficult to do the research. Now the research is pouring in. So all you have to do is Google, if you've got a particular condition in mind that you're interested in, it's very, very easy to get the latest research from reasonable sources. So yes, I think predictably there's going to be reasonable medical uses for CBD. Now, there is no justification for actually smoking or eating the marijuana plant in terms of that narrow range for THC, because that's very specific. It can be medically prescribed and can be watched. And the Israelis, who have done a lot of work on marijuana, are horrified at what's happening in the United States. There's no dosage control. And people are selling all kinds of varieties of pot, and they have no idea what the relative ingredient mix is. And now on the back end, Colorado has had to ban like brownies from having more than X number of milligrams of THC. I mean, the backdoor knowledge is coming back to the front door. And so, I mean, the Israelis are saying, how can you do this? You don't know anything about dosage. You know very little about side effects. They're horrified. So the answer is, it's the same as, don't think of your research with this as very much different than it might be with turmeric, you know, or other exotic herbs that may or may not be helpful supplements. The fact is that unless you're developing a pharmaceutical drug, it's almost impossible to fund the clinical trials necessary to answer the question of, is this effective over and above the placebo effect? Now, with pain, that's particularly significant. I always remind people of how Prozac got on the market. Very popular antidepressant. Well, you've got to do controlled tests with, you got to give the drug, and then you at least have to have a control group that thinks they're getting it, but aren't. And so they did about a couple thousand people. And there wasn't enough difference between the placebo and the Prozac group. They had to do 40,000 people. The end result was that 40%, they were measuring depression, 40% of the placebo people taking sugar pills improved. 43% taking Prozac improved. And statistically, there were enough people, so it was statistically significant. So it got approved. Okay? It's a drug. Now, especially when you're dealing with straight marijuana, there's no question that you can get a placebo effect out of it. So some of the anecdotes, because the mind is very, very powerful in terms of how it interprets bodily reactions. I swear I had terrible pain and I smoked dope and now I can get through the day. That may be true, but we're not sure what it is, whether it's the belief that can happen or not. And so it's tricky. The science goes on. So, but again, when you're not dealing with the mind-altering drugs like CBD, you treat it like any other possible, either natural or synthetic supplement that could be helpful. And It may turn out well, it may not turn out well, but it's nothing to be, you don't have to give it special consideration. You take it in the same way that you get these ads for supplements that's going to cure every conceivable, conceivable disease. And it might turn out that the supplement is going to be helpful for some kinds of things and not for others. Brad can tell you about that. Angela. It's nothing to be afraid of, yes.
Could you tell a little bit more about what's going on in Portugal with the drugs?
Well, the Portuguese have taken basically a decriminalization thing where people can register and as users and not get arrested and go to counseling, sometimes to go to substitute therapy. Switzerland does this a lot, where, like, for example, methadone is a substitute for heroin, but without the heroin is not a terrible drug per se on the body, other than overdosing and being dead, which can be considered a side effect. It's mildly serious. Right. But it's the addictive quality. So things like naltrexone and methadone, etc., are substitutes, and so the Portuguese would detoxify over a long time, whereas here, usually somebody gets arrested and they're put in detox, which is very, very tough, and really are not equipped to go back out because the craving continues. So they are doing much better with getting people early in, recognizing that they can work with them over time. And the criticism was it would be too expensive to do that. And I think they've demonstrated that the economic trade-off in terms of improving productivity, cutting down crime, etc., was worth the experiment. But we haven't quite gotten there yet. We do it with alcohol problems in a little way, but we haven't done it with illegal drugs yet.
Allan?
But in the new humanity, we'll have some good treatment facilities. Yes.
What about any research with video games and the relationship with drugs? Because video games require skills, and people with drugs, fast reaction. People doing drugs would not react as well.
Well, I think that's, if you've got a gamer kid, I think it's a good kind of leverage and say, you're going to lose. Stoned, which will be true.
Is there any research to see people who do a lot of gaming, are they less likely to be drug addicts?
No, but you probably get a grant to do that. I mean, you can get addicted to almost anything, including video games. That's right.
Allan?
Carolyn?
A little while back, I saw a piece on a Scandinavian country, I'm forgetting which one, and they decided to offer these comprehensive after-school programs for kids with, you name it, sports, crafts, games. Drug use went down enormously, very successful.
It's very successful. Part of it is time. We went into the worst of the housing projects in Chicago to see if we could reduce juvenile crime, and did the comprehensive after-school program. Results were really, really good, but there was a little asterisk, and it may not have been the stuff in the program, it's the fact we kept them from going home. And most juvenile crime in Chicago done between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. And we kept them in school. But involvement, any kind of involvement is always going to be very, very helpful.
Allan, did you write a book way back when about, and I haven't been able to find it again, am I dreaming, but about finding a like,
Yes.
that there's a hole, like there's an emptiness to get to an addiction. Is there, so what you do is you fill that with music, art, dance. And that seems to me would be like
Well,
you
we got,
said.
this is a book called Understanding Drug Use. It's certainly out of print. But amazingly, about 40 years later, it's still pretty relevant. Baba, in essence, developed the theory of alternatives to drugs in a certain sense by giving, the spiritual path as being not only valid but reinforcing. And we got the government to adopt it as one of the 6 main strategies back in the 80s. And I still think it's an approach that works, and that is, if you look at the phenomenon less as an illness than as a preference, then you, instead of asking the question of why is your family so screwed up that you have to take drugs, you ask the question of what do you like about it? In other words, what is the motivation that's getting reinforced? And then work backwards to try to work alternatives that are both as satisfying, but also give long-term gratification. And we tried that in Boise, Idaho, and it worked pretty well. But again, it didn't get, it's hard to get out of the medical model of drug abuse as being a behavioral disorder that if you've got it, you can collect insurance for the treatment. I mean, in a certain sense, it comes down to that a lot. These psychiatrists, bless their heart, are great at inventing new disorders. My favorite, and this is authentic, if you need help, you have this, is information overload disorder.
Information
now,
I got
it's
it.
now an official, it's in the DSM, yes, it's in the DSM code. And there it shows you the associated symptoms, confusion, anxiety, inability to do your, and so now you can get that. My favorite diagnosis was adjustment disorder, which is good for everything. It doesn't look bad on your record. So the system, in other words, doesn't pay anybody for helping you get better unless you're ill. Now, the new consciousness is coming where even corporations are saying, we should be involved with quality of life and quality of physical and emotional life as a developmental learning thing that's going to improve productivity in general life, but our economic system is not willing to pay for it yet, in a certain way. We're fighting that. Carol?
I don't know if you want to talk about a different subject or if
Sure.
anybody wants you to. But I would like to hear a little bit more about the new humanity and, kind of the trajectory that you were following towards the end of your talk. If
Yes,
that's
new
okay.
humanities.
Sure, let's go
Yeah.
there.
So, Baba had said that the Kali Yuga was really bad this time in creation. It was really bad. And also that America, at least around the time of the 30s and the 40s, was pretty gross in terms of its spirituality. Pretty down there. But it possessed the reservoir of energy that would be used to actually lead the world in spiritual development. Now, part of what Baba suggests was the importance of this cycle of cycles was that this was the turning point, possibly in billions of years, from evolution to involution. And that the lessons that humanity has learned, the progress that consciousness has made, now has given humanity the capability, for the first time perhaps, of moving towards more a divine life. And that part of what he was doing, and the whole business about breaking silence, was to flood the universe with a new kind of divine energy, which was really unprecedented, and which wouldn't have worked in previous cycles. It just would have blown up people. They couldn't hold it. And he started describing what the new humanity would be like. The interesting part of that was he didn't, some of the mystics have talked about Baba said, human form is enough already, we don't need to go past that. But other people said, well, we might get smaller, we might be able to breathe more energy from the air, etc., like that. Baba's description was really more about harmonious living, and it would come from the raising of consciousness. And it would come naturally. I had a quote I didn't read, but that would move towards the time when you would do, where people would do for others what they would do for themselves, as a natural kind of event. Now, part of, at least one of my interpretation that fits nicely into this model, is his talk about the destruction of 3/4 of the world, and that there made it so that the evolving forms and the evolving consciousness are those which will be able, the ones that can survive, if you will, the evolutionary movement, can handle this new energy in a way that makes it possible. And the push would be in a change of consciousness. He talked a little bit about the movement towards the age of reason to intuition. And we talked about intuition really as a different sense almost. Not the way we usually use the term, but as a way of knowing that was a higher level way of knowing and being able to see things.
Allan?
Yeah? Steve?
My understanding of intuition is that it is directly related to reincarnation and previous lives, the experience of previous lives.
Ordinary intuition is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But this is the kind of thing where, for example, our fantasies of what people on the subtle planes would be perceiving is that they would maybe be perceiving energy fields around people, etc. It's where, if you will, on a basic level, instinct towards love is amplified greatly. The other element of that is the ability to handle lower desires better. The new humanity. It's like when Bob went on the New Life, he really gave an experiment. Remember the first time it didn't work. It was really on the edge. Remember he had to call it off. He had to do it again. Second time.
I'm sorry, what are you
When was that?
referring to? I'm missing.
The new life.
Remember what happened? He went out and he called it off because people could not remain cheerful. They didn't. They weren't able to really do it. And came back and tried it again, and it worked.
What did he do exactly?
There are some of us looking equally puzzled to me.
I don't understand. I
And
never heard that.
I never heard that there was an initial
Yes.
failed
me either.
attempt.
I never did either.
It's in Lord Mayor.
Where he stepped out of the new.
Yeah, it probably wasn't written that this was a failure. You know, it was
Right,
a
so
situation
tell
where
me-
people called back and blah, 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 people came back to Bombay, and so you'll see it's in there.
Okay, so what this common person sees as the beginning of the new life is that first effort, and then he had to reform it.
He had to reform it.
Okay,
So he went for the goal. And part of that was then the control over the egoistic desires, which the new humanity type folks are going to be better and better at. They're going to be more capable of not giving in to the ego's, you know, the seven veils and the seven desires, which are all, if you put them together, they all mean selfishness. Mine, me, I want this, I want pleasure, I want money, I want right? I want to win. I want to be better than you know, all those kinds of things. That the sanskar release will allow us not to identify as much with those desires. Now people, I think in the early days some of us had this wildly fantastic view of the new humanity, like kind of floating around in little clouds.
Communes.
Yes, all kinds of stuff. And then I remember, it was Lud Dimple, when we were in our long-term solid Baba lover from the 2 weeks thing. It was at that time with early Sufism. And somebody asked them about that. And of course, in the hippie ethic, we looked forward to having no gigs at all, no responsibility, which we thought the new humanity would offer.
Right.
You know, just sit around and groove spiritually. And listen, what are you talking about? Often would help out in, for example, with Sufism, he totally developed the governance structure, the curriculum, everything like that. He was very interested because, in a sense, the Baba group was a condensation of what the new humanity could be, and he wanted them to act that way. And you know, he kind of said that's what he expected. He expected a higher standard of consciousness and interaction in Baba groups, even though it was also what we might call a series of spiritual urban ashrams, where you get the opportunity for all the friction to happen. Now, Meher Baba's training of his disciples, it's heavy duty. He put those people through really tough. It was boot camp for years. Boot camp. And following Baba is a kind of boot camp. So he makes sure that you get in situations you cannot not grow, because you can't just sit there. Because he won't allow it. He will put you in situations that will bring up stuff. You can't just sit around and need to be worked on for individual development. At the same time, he's showing how people in internal development, which is not easy, can get along, can be harmonious, and can unite in both projects and goals and spiritual celebration in a way that really, really helps humanity and is an object for was very, very encouraging. And it is a relatively unique thing that there's now enough Bob lovers in a few places where that can develop. It's very tricky to pull off. So the new humanity, at least as I understand Baba to describe it, is less some fantastical science fiction creation as it is really having much nicer people around who are conscious. And what he keeps stressing is seeing the one in the many. What he's stressing is you're an actor in the film, you play a certain role, but you understand that there's a film going on, and it's one film. It's all part of one consciousness. And to try to develop that instinct that you're as kind to other people as you are to parts of your own body. Almost impossible. But in the new humanity, people will be able to do that. I think that's, in some sense, the function, this is my own theory, the function of pet animals.
Oh, yes.
Now, anybody here have pets or had them? What? You like your pets?
Come on, like is a small word.
And here's the thing.
I'm
Is it not true?
Totally in love with my beagle.
That-
What are you talking?
Is it not true that you put up with much more behavioral disarray of your pets than with people you know? Is that not true?
But the pets don't have the capacity.
Oh, that's right. That's right. But they're still, but you can see, you can see the higher consciousness in these pets. And Baba, Baba paid a lot of attention to animals and pets. And for example, he said about dogs, their job is to process love. It's their job. That's what they do. And that some of the animals actually have, it's not manifest, but the capability for higher intuition, which you can sometimes see. So that's the question is, how is it that humans can put up with pets very easily, even if they pee on the floor or whatever, or don't obey you, and infants, but with other adults, we're not nearly as tolerant.
I would say animals have pure natural sanskaras. Their sanskaras are 100% natural. And, regardless of whether you know what that word means or you have a cosmology that word fits into, they are extremely predictable. And their instinct is understandable by us.
Yeah.
And so, unless you're like really kind of a little crazy and really stressed out, you can just take a moment and go, well, there's a reason why it's doing that.
Yeah.
With human beings, not so. Not so. That would be my answer to your
Well,
question.
my answer is different.
Okay, yes, Dennis.
I've never seen a human being who was as cute peeing on the floor as my beagle. And my beagle has done it many times.
Not even babies?
Well,
Not even
sometimes,
babies.
actually therapeutically, I use that with clients who say, I cannot stand this person. And it's something that, like, even in a couple, some people complain of other people who are over-affectionate, or, very grasping, want to be around all the time, I said, look, instead of getting mad, just think of them as a big Labrador retriever that's jumping up on you. And yes, you'd rather have them not do it, but you don't mind nearly as much because they don't have the capacity and they're not doing it intentionally. They are basically doing the best they can as a dog or a cat or a bird or whatever. And that's also the fact with humans. but it's hard for us to understand. Everybody is really doing the best they can. If they could do better, they would. If I could be better, I would do it. But if I can't, I can't. Baba never, if you see his instructions, it would often always use the word try. He's always saying, you think you can obey me? You can't. But try. You think you really love me? No, you can't. But try to. So it's kind of the attempt in it, but it's hard to think that everybody in their own, if you get inside everybody's head, they're doing the best they can. Both to survive in their own being, and they're behaving as best as they can. They get out of control, you know? You pet them and give them a treat. Works better than getting mad at them.
Did you ever hear the story of Bob the cat? There's a story, and it ties into your original topic.
Yeah.
Where a guy who was an addict, and he would busk on the streets in London.
Yeah.
And he comes home, and there's a cat in the hallway, and he feeds it, and he says, "Okay, that's it." You know, he tries to push it away the next day, and the cat falls, and finally gets on his shoulder. He goes and he busks, and all of a sudden, all these people are coming to hear him and talk, and they get so tied in, and then he starts getting more and more, famous and all that. But meanwhile, he found a reason. He fell in love with this cat, and he found a reason to get off his addiction. And then eventually writes this book, and then a movie. But but I mean, I don't know why I brought that. It's just it seems to tie in with animals and then addiction.
No, it all ties in. We did a study of heroin addicts in San Francisco, and just saw what happened over a period. And we looked at the people who survived, who stopped, not in jail or anything like that. And the two best predictors of them stopping was getting married and having a child.
Wow.
So, that it really does all tie in. There's great satisfaction in, as well as struggle in having another being dependent on you, or at least partially dependent on you. So Baba, if we could treat each other as well as we treat our pets, or even other people's pets, which we're kind of very respectful of, right? You don't criticize somebody else's pet. That would be how it would be, the new humanity might begin to look like. Now, it is very difficult in this era of bad news, if you will, the fact that bad news is what everybody wants to write about or hear about. And Bob is certainly shaking up the atmosphere. Still, you can see other kinds of things that pretend to the new humanity. Worldwide poverty is down. Longevity of life is down in the third world. Crime, as bad as it has been, is really generally improving. Health procedures are generally improving. Realization of spirituality and consciousness is way up. More people now, a lot of people will say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, or I'm interested in that. One survey showed that over half of Americans believed in reincarnation of some sort. We are finding out more and more of the mystics in organized religion. Bible lovers are making really big impacts on Roman Catholicism, for example. And Mayor Bob has invaded Roman Catholicism.
How is that so? Explain.
Huh?
How is that so? Explain.
Explain?
Yes.
Well, I can't give away too much.
Oh,
But I can tell you this, that Bible lovers were basically
record, no, just
responsible
kidding.
for creating the 6th designated sacred space of the Catholic Church as certified by the last Pope, not this Pope, in the Porciuncula in San Francisco, which is a close adaptation of the Porciuncula in the church where St. Francis was. And that the adaptation was so well done that it became with St. Peter's and other places, one of the sacred places. And Bible lovers were very, very key in helping the local, some of the San Francisco people who were really dedicated to St. Francis of Assisi to work the politics and get the support to be able to pull that off. That's one example. Another example was we somehow got permission, the Sufism chorus performed when the Pope convened in Assisi an interfaith kind of interfaith group about 3 years ago. We got to perform it in St. Francis Tomb and in other places. Snuck in Baba song. And there are clergy in the Roman Catholic Church at a very high level who are Baba lovers. And there is strangely enough, for example, the Roman Catholics have the best shot at being an adopter of Baba's more mystical orientation, even though they're thought of as being the most rigid. But theologically, it's all there. And I think I mentioned briefly when I was here with Digambar at the center, my encounter with Bishop Fulton Sheen. Anybody hear about that story?
Oh, tell us again.
Well, I think it's important from this other context. And that is, we have always believed that there were people deep in the Vatican who knew that the Avatar would come back, right? And that one of the secrets of the had not been revealed, and we all thought that might be it. Yeah. And we also knew they had the best library on astrology in the world. That's true. And that, of course, there was a mystical tradition, and that St. Francis was the only perfect master in this system of creation in the West. And that he was very careful. He was very careful to get the permission of the dumb Pope, not the dumb Pope, but he played the game, right? And we all know that Council of Nicaea, that before the 4th century, people, reincarnation was accepted, and they had a fight, and the fight was just a practical fight. I said, the people are taking advantage of this reincarnation thing. If I don't get it right this time, I'll get it right next time. I ain't gonna screw around now. So let's do heaven and hell. And basically that was it. So I was on a plane from Rochester, New York to St. Louis, and make a long story short, my seatmate told me that Archbishop Sheen was on the plane. And for those who don't know, he was at one time the defender of the faith of the Catholic Church, and he had a very popular network TV show on Catholic theology. He was very arrestingly speaking, very charismatic guy. and eventually got in trouble with the church because he started giving away church property. He's the Archbishop of Rochester. And I learned he was on the plane, and I was in a foul mood at the time. But I was absolutely curious. I said, this guy, he was deep in the matter. He knows everything about Catholic theology. I think he's a good guy. He needs to know about Baba. But part of me said, don't be crazy. I mean, you can't walk up to that teacher, tell him Christ is back and he missed it. What? So I didn't know what to do. I was very involved. Finally, I said, "Oh hell, I know what I'll do. Just give him." I had a copy of God in the Pill with me. It was a small book with Baba's views on drugs. I knew he was interested in social and public health, so I thought I'd just come up to him and show him that and split, which I attempted to do. And I found him, and I found he didn't look at all like he did on TV. He was not 6'4", he was 5'3", and he was in Coach. He was reading a book on violence and nonviolence. And I said, Bishop Sheen, sorry to disturb you, but I know you're interested in young people, and I'm a psychologist. I work with, I was talking like that fast.
How old were you at that time?
20, 30, something. Early 30s, probably.
Thank you.
And I thought you might be interested in this. He looked at us, well, he said, sit down. I said, sit down? There was a place next to him. So we got in a conversation. And I liked him a lot. He gave off this sweet feeling, nice eyes. And we talked a little bit about drugs and stuff like that. And then at one point he says, what do you think we should do about the church? Yeah, I want you can imagine my reaction. What? The Archbishop, defender of the faith, asking this obviously Jewish. But then I said, hey,
Go for it.
Go for it. This is an opportunity to get into it. And then I said, well, I said a couple of things. I was trying to be calm. But I knew he was kind, so he wouldn't kill me.
Or have you killed?
Probably exercise me. But so I said something about, well, I think the priests should, even though they're doing a lot in the social road to these kids really want to know about spirituality. They really want to know about spiritual development, about the deeper aspects of it. And then I decided to go for broke. I said, it's probably time that the church went back to the teachings on reincarnation. And I think that heaven and hell has done what it's needed to do, and it's now counterproductive. And I explained why. And I knew that, given his position, he would not say anything like this. But I knew that I could tell from his reaction that I knew it. And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, well, maybe I'll give a TV show on mysticism. And so then, hey, I was hot. I gave him the discourses.
Which you just happened to have with you.
I happened to have with you. And so he said, oh, thanks. And he flips it open. He flips it open to a chapter called Violence and Nonviolence. And even he said, oh, my.
That happens all the time.
So anyway, I always had a good feeling about that. And then I learned that Phyllis Frederick from L.A. also liked him a lot, and independently had sent him, I think probably a photo of, a replication of a photo of him that looked most like Jesus. And she didn't want to be pushy either, but she just said, I thought you should enjoy this. We really enjoy your shows, and I thought you might enjoy this. And he writes back, and he says, "Dear Ms. Frederick, thank you so much for that lovely photograph of our Lord." I said, "Well, that's very pleasant." I said, "Wait a minute." He said, "Photograph? Who had cameras at the time of Jesus?" Well, interesting. Huh? So, and he's going to be he actually is going to qualify as a saint. He would have already, but believe it or not, the people who liked him a lot are fighting over where his bones should be buried. But you'll watch, you'll get, what do you call it, canonized?
Yeah, that's what they go.
Really soon. So that's going on, and,
Allan?
go ahead.
I can tell you something. I'm very glad that you brought this up, this whole subject. I go to a number of different churches, and I'm quite active and participate in different churches, and I do so in an effort to pursue unity. I mean, I consciously do that. And I find that people in churches are really nice people generally.
Yes, they are.
And they're really like, everything that you'd want Baba people to be. I mean, a lot of,
Yes.
They're charitable and sweet and huggy and all that.
Yes.
On a more serious note, what I find is for many, I mean, I do live in a retirement town. That's true.
Really?
But what I hear is that the number of people sitting in the seats of the big churches is diminishing.
Right.
And some are feeling it as a hemorrhage, and some are feeling it just as ominous. And they don't know what to do about it, because the fire and brimstone ain't cutting it. And they're really trying to be creative. And so they're trying to invite a sense, some of them are trying to invite a sense of interfaith.
Yes.
And I'm actually part of a group that discusses mysticism and contemplative prayer. And this is in a First Presbyterian church.
All right.
So, and I talk with some people, some old timers maybe in the Baba community, and I call it a misconception that religious people are negative towards Meher Baba. I don't see that. I've donated the discourses to a number of different churches, and they put it in the other section. But they put it in the other section. Right. So I would like to get your impression. I mean, I know you're a medical professional and you deal with research and that. But if you have any feedback or any kind of a perception of how religions are perceiving Meher Baba, or I see the cut line as reincarnation, I really do, or how they're perceiving these not new agey things, but real alternate religions. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned this, Christina, because that's what we're seeing a lot in what we would call ordinary organized churches, not still yet not the evangelical churches, where this stuff is okay to talk about, and where Meher Baba doesn't necessarily have an inherently negative.
Exactly.
I mean, I often have given away his materials. This is a really good philosopher who writes in English, or probably the best psychologist in India. You can take a look. And I think Elizabeth Patterson was very, very active in the churches. I happened in California to see an example of that. We have a new Sufi center, and we agreed to host the Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County, which is a county of about 1 million people, of which Sufism is a member. We had 110 different congregations running from the Islamic Center to a paganist congregation, everybody. And we hosted them in the hall that had Baba's colophon in it. And we had a reception downstairs where, Baba's image was all over everything. And Murshid Connor gave kind of an introductory thing and talked about the importance of unity and the fact that this Interfaith Council really had worked together on several projects. I was very impressed. And all had enough of the core similar orientations towards love, towards charity, towards the celebration of God that brought them together. I was extremely impressed. I had really never seen that. So that, and you knew then that in all of these 110 congregations, you could go as a Baba lover. And you'd just be,
Accepted.
Yeah. And just like the Islamic people were accepted. And it was interesting because even though it was clear the different pastors understood the theological differences and honored them. For example, at one point, there were some singers, they wanted everybody to hold hands, and they understood the Muslims wouldn't be doing that, which was fine. And so there was all a respect for their differences, but a deep commitment to unify. And there's no reason to think that we would have to intervene with these nice people. And Baba has said that there are many people who don't know him who are living the kind of life that he wants to live. I really like that. They were amazing. They had a lot of projects that the county couldn't do, homeless shelters. Mm-hmm. They also organized an anti-Muslim march. Where all of the congregations got together. Remember when the Muslims were in deep doo-doo and rallied around their center. The Interfaith Council came to the support of the Hindus who were building a temple in part of the county and encountered the same kind of resistance we had in the Sufi Baba Center. And they rallied around that, where the neighbors were all against us. So it was very, very, very powerful, very encouraging. And I kind of like going to different services. They got good, some of them got very good choirs, and and the Catholic masses are a lot of fun. You can get into it, and you can see there's almost nothing that goes on in those churches that can't be linked to what Baba has said in some way.
What you're saying, though, is so important and so part of the present change. Like the Pope is shaking things up.
Yes.
There's a lot of wonderful things that are happening, and as you say, the news reports a lot of dark things.
Yes.
But there's a lot of wonderful things. A dark is balanced with light.
Right.
Just a quick aside on your mention of the Fatima secret.
Yeah.
UK Baba lover Richard O'Casey, who's a filmmaker, is under the pen name of Rochelle Sands, writing a thriller series called Metabox. That's based on the Fatima secret, and pulls Baba in.
No.
Yeah.
Whoa.
He has 2 volumes out now.
That's cool. That's very cool. Well, we think we're having most of our, at least obvious success with the St. Francis connection. And there's like lay orders, and you can't get more. It's tough to find a crack between St. Francis's stuff and then Baba's stuff. I haven't found it yet. So for example, all of the Mayor Baba's songs that we sing on the West Coast are good for the St. Francis people. It's right on. And likewise, so we did their midnight mass last New Year's, did a joint mass with them. And it's not, I mean, I would have thought it would have been uncomfortable for the Baba people as much as, but it wasn't at all. It wasn't at all. And particularly some of the ethics, we did a special trip down to Mexico City, and there's particular interest in Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a very mystical figure for the Mexicans and the Spanish, and has a lot of miraculous qualities that can be hooked in to a Baba's manifestation. And it exists uniquely in kind of Western Hispanic culture. And some of the people who were really, and Our Lady is a big deal. I mean, Our Lady is the whole, that is the aspect of God that you actually pray to get relief. And it's okay. I mean, that's, in the mystical order of things, that's the compassionate element that you're not asking God, because he's already disposed, but you're asking Our Lady, who gets in there. That's right. Yeah. And so some of the people from the Our Lady of Guadalupe came up, and they got very interested in Baba, extremely interested in Baba.
Wow.
So now there's a kind of a, and the bishop of the Church of Our Lady of Guadalupe is now in regular communication on some joint projects.
Is that a nunnery associated with that cathedral?
Is it a what?
Is Our Lady of Guadalupe a nunnery associated with the Cathedral of
Our Lady of Guadalupe is the figure of the, I think it's 14th century occurrence, but there is a cathedral that's built around worship of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Her feast day is this Tuesday.
Huh?
Her feast day is 12/12 this Tuesday.
That's right.
Her feast day.
This Tuesday.
Is what?
So yeah,
Her
they're
feast day is this Tuesday, the 12/12.
At the beginning of
Oh.
and that's it's a big deal in this.
Judy did.
Yes, there's nunneries and
Wow,
there's,
that's
there's, I would not say I don't think we would call that a different order in the church. But it is probably, I mean, like, it is the second most visited religious shrine in the world.
Whoa.
Is that shrine in Mexico City.
Is that where Mother Mary appeared to children? Is that the whole thing?
No,
Was that
that's
that's
It's
something else?
related to that.
Oh, okay.
It's a very Mary-esque.
Yeah.
Mary-esque. But again, the transition and the concordance with Baba was not difficult in the least. And if, the nice thing is, and the thing that always attracted me to Baba was, he's not a jealous avatar. Being the only being, I just, nobody's going to be jealous of himself, so it is theologically very easy for us to reach out and honor Babaistic principles in other traditions. There was a time when we tried to rope them in, but I think we've become much more mature about the timing of that. And when that happens, people coming to Baba is a unique event that's it's usually off the charts. It's not that you've been talking to them and they're getting into it. There's something, boom, that happens. And they can't help it. But it's really nice because we don't, we don't have to be in the least prejudiced against anything else. And that's really the one thing that the Baba orientation, Mayor Baba's path has, if you want to say, superior to all other religious systems. I shouldn't say that because it contradicts the whole point, but still, it's that whereas Mayor Baba can include everyone and everything. Most other traditions.
As we have our Mastery and Servitude plaque right there in the column.
Yes.
The Baba's symbol, we have all the religions.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Very inclusive, very inclusive.
Boy, and that really snowed the Interfaith Council. When they the colophon is like
Yeah.
20 feet by 20 feet.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
So they really loved that.
Yeah.
Okay. We got pretty much all of them.
I do notice that perhaps it's historic and isn't happening anymore, I'll say that maybe. But there has been a condescension among Baba people about those people who follow religions.
Yes.
And who, have a limited view that way. And that is just not my experience. I don't have a lot of experience with Hinduism or Muslim, Islam, but I have more experience with Christianity. And what it takes for many Christians to have a living relationship with a person who died that's a leap. That's a real leap to have something alive with someone who's dead. And so, I have a lot of respect for that.
Yes.
And that I believe in the reincarnation of avatars is almost peripheral. It's not the point,
Sure.
And so I feel that just my sense of the future is that there will be a growing sense of how one's relationship with God is a living thing in the moment. Mm-hmm. And that the structures of religion will be less important. And people will want that, and they'll want to be with people who want that.
Yeah.
And that's what will draw people together. And it won't matter. So I don't feel condescension at all personally towards people who are finding God through other religions. And I don't try and say, well, come on over here.
All right.
Well, that's the whole spiritual but not religious definition that's been defined by the Pew Trust.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only remaining difficulty that Baba-oriented people would have with some religious systems is their prejudice.
Their own background.
Okay. And their rigidity and their own orthodoxy. But as you say, that's beginning to melt. It's beginning to melt. And
there was a true story years ago that the statue of Our Lady of Fatima was on tour in South America, and the plane encountered much turbulence, and the people all started praying to Our Lady of Guadalupe, please save Our Lady of Fatima.
That's a reasonable intervention.
And that's a great segue for me. I think a reasonable intervention may be for, it is now 10 of 10.
It's
Okay?
been wonderful.
All right.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
So,
Alan, thank you for. We have, now this group has architects. You guys have helped build a reasonable model of the new humanity in only an hour.